This is my second in this open-ended, long-winded podcast, audio podcast I'm doing. And I want to see if I can clarify by way of summary what I was trying to get at with that first episode. First of all, I'm doing this because it's time. Who knows how much longer I have. I've collected up a whole worldview that's not just a collage of opinions patched together. It's actually something different, and I'm trying to get at what that is. It's a different way of trying to understand myself and understand us. I don't see it practiced in the past, and I think I know why it hasn't been practiced this way. So, as I suggested, in the axial age, in the age when we're starting to write down our thoughts and therefore examine them more closely, we notice that we debate our interpretations of reality. And then the question became, well, who's qualified to do that analysis of reality? Who's best qualified? Who's not biased? Who really can observe reality and figure out what's good and what's bad? And immediately, because of the power of language, we went to dualist approaches to that. So to explain the mysterious aspects of life, we're talking about 3,500 years ago, we simply assume that there's some other dimension that's unseen that explains what we can't explain. And it becomes a source of unexplained explanations. And then it becomes a source of what we would call completeness, a sense that you have now got the interpretive strategy, the interpretive powers that will last forever. So you can analyze all change because you now have the perfect perspective for analyzing all change, analyzing all difference. So that would be something that would come out in this age. You've got people saying, what's good, what's bad, trying to figure it out. They're debating between them. And then there's a kind of a pulling rank where say, well, I'm unbiased. I really know what's good and bad. You don't because you're biased. So this is the beginning of credibility wars. And they're played out how? With the bona fides of some dualistic perspective. That is, because I have access to the secret realm that is beyond us to know, because I have access to it, I am the authority on how to interpret change. And so that's been going on for millennia. And I'm saying that I stumbled into an alternative to doing that I think is important and interesting. Now, I say it's been going on for millennia, and you might think, well, yeah, the dualists, that would be the people who believe there's a natural world and then there's a supernatural world. That's dualism. And I'm suggesting something beyond that. I'm saying that even scientists do that. Whenever you employ unexplained explanations in your explanations for things, you are a dualist. So if I talk about motivation, if I do the science of motivation and study how motivation works, or if I study how information or significance happens, how meaning happens, I am doing it based on unexplained explanations. Because I haven't explained what information is, I just kind of describe it or define it, and then I employ it to explain things, even though I haven't really explained what it is. So what is the alternative to dualism? Well, there is an alternative that has been popular, you'd say, in recent centuries, more so these days than ever. It's called reductionism, or it's called materialism, or it's called, most appropriately, eliminativism. That is, since there is no supernatural or beyond nature realm that could explain things like information or motivation, then there is no such thing as information or motivation. So you'll get this from the kinds of thinkers who say, look, it's all just chance replication and differential survival of replicators. So all you've got is DNA and it's copying, and it's not really trying to copy. It's just a chemical. Chemical reactions lead to copied molecules, and some copy better than others, and those are the ones that are around. And You, as a self, you're not real. You're a figment. You're a figment of your imagination. You know, there's a paradox there. But this is what eliminative materialism or reductionism are arguing. Since we can't rely on some supernatural source for explaining our unexplained explanations, let's assume that those things that we're trying to explain don't exist. There is no meaning of life. That is, nothing is really meaningful to you or to anyone. It's all just chance replication. And in a way, this dovetails with Buddhist notions or Zen notions or these kind of agnostic, antiseptic, sometimes very colorfully expressed versions of a colorless world. And it's also a source of a kind of romanticism. It's an anti-romantic romanticism. It's basically cynicism, which is, I don't believe in the supernatural, and therefore I can romanticize myself as someone who is above that, doesn't buy into such mythology, not delusional like those people who believe that they are really selves. And it also can lead to a kind of tapping out where you say, well, in reality, there's no reality, or convince yourself you're not a self, or choose determinism. There's all sorts of advantages to be gained from taking this posture, taking this stance. And I'm saying that between the two of them, between this kind of dualistic source of unexplained explanations, like a meaning comes from another realm, and that reductionist elimination of meaning, there's a path that hasn't been taken, which is I have to be able to explain all of those things derived within nothing but nature. I have to be able to explain, and not just explain away, and not just explain through a kind of poetic figurativeness, selves and trying. As fundamental as that. So if I'm trying to understand myself, that's where I go. I don't start up with, maybe you could say I start with impressions of myself as someone who is motivated and finds things meaningful and takes in information and uses information. But I have to explain that. And I feel like that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. Studying with and then becoming research colleagues with this Harvard, Berkeley neuroscientist, biological anthropologist, Terrence Deacon. He's an interesting guy. He's different from me in many ways, and yet our compatibility and interest in this other approach, which, as of this morning, he called it deriving. I think of it a few different ways. That is, I have to be able to explain everything that I do within nothing but nature. I don't get to claim another realm that explains it, and I don't get to not explain it by saying there is no other realm. I have to explain everything I do, and I have to do it from the ground up. Which ground? Not the most fundamental ground, because we don't know what the most fundamental ground is, but we do know it does. You don't have to go down to quantum mechanics to do this. You can actually explain it in terms of basic classical physics. And I have to be able to explain everything I do from that. Now, his term for it is deriving. I have another term that I coined this last week for what we're trying to do. I would say that it's endogenerative or autogenerative. That is, I have to explain from the fact that disorder tends to accumulate. I have to explain how the order that is me results, and the order that is me is auto-regenerative. Unlike lots of order we see in the universe, let's say whirlpools or chain reactions or Bernard cells, which are those hexagonal cells that form in oil if you heat it up, that's all order, but it's not regenerating itself. So I have to be able to explain how from that kind of order you'd ever get the kind of order that regenerates itself. That's what a self is. It's self-regenerative. What is it regenerating? I'll get to that in just a minute. But I also have to explain everything up from there. So here's one way I was thinking about it this weekend, this auto-regenerative, deep explaining kind of approach turns out, I just found out this weekend, explanatory depth. Imagine that brat who kept on asking, why? Yeah, but why? So you keep on giving an answer. Why is the sky blue? And then you give an answer and the kid says, yeah, but why? This is sort of like that, but the question isn't why. Why implies a purpose. To what end is the sky blue? This is how. So it's a deeply howist approach with no skip steps, seeing how far back and forward we can go in explaining the origins of selves and trying, the difference between life and non-life. And that's what we're trying to do with no smoke and mirrors, no hand waving, no glib answers to the question how. I have to explain in strictly physical terms how you'd ever get a creature like me in a universe that is not predisposed to generate creatures like me. It's predisposed to degeneration. To do that, we're not looking for something added. If I said, well, I'm matter plus a vital force, or plus information, or plus motivation, or plus spirit or soul, whatever, give it a name like that, I'm re-entering the realm of dualism. I can't do that. I have to actually derive it within nothing but physical chemistry, and the simplest kind of physical chemistry. I'm not a physical chemist. There's lots I don't understand, and you don't need to understand lots in order to pull off our explanation. And I'll still argue, feel free to contradict me on this, challenge me on this, that I'm not hand-waving. I think I can explain it in a way that's completely intuitive. Just for motivation's sake, imagine if any day now, whether through our work or someone else, we had a perfectly plausible explanation for what selves and meaning and information and purposeful behavior, motivation, appetite, all that stuff was. An explanation about as simple as our explanation for lightning. What if we had an explanation for what the actual fuck we are that a fifth grader could understand? I think that's where we are. I think the reason that we don't feel like we're anywhere near having an explanation for this mysterious force we call life is that the question as posed is unfamiliar. We have been relaxing into either the dualism I just described, where it's magic coming from an extra realm, or the reductionism where, convince yourself you're not a self, you're just a figment of your imagination. Either one of those have been paths of less resistance. We haven't had to actually think about it. I'm arguing that the thing that I have made familiar in myself is very unfamiliar to people, and that's why it boggles our minds that we could ever be close to a real explanation for what we are. I think of humankind as a little bit like dejected lovers. We've been asking this question, what the actual fuck are we, for thousands and thousands of years, and we keep on sliding off into motivations just a figment of our imagination. It's all deterministic, or it's magic coming from another source, whether it be God or a higher power or the magic of information or the magic of motivation or will, whatever, abstractions like that. We've been doing it for so long and have failed to get around to this question, how would you derive it within nothing but basic physical chemistry? And we also are not satisfied with the answers, because whatever answer we come up with, like, okay, I am no longer biased and I see what the real truth is. I've had the truth revealed to me because I took these drugs, or because I had the spiritual awakening, or because I became a scientist and realized that all means nothing, whatever. None of them have been satisfying. Everybody's complete answer, like I'm the unbiased, clear thinker, is unconvincing to everyone. And so there's a way in which we're a bunch of people who have argued something out and gotten nowhere. Think of us like a couple that's been bickering for 25 years and they're just not going to talk about it anymore. We kind of given up on it. It's related to what I call autophobic agnosticism. Fear of self-knowledge that has also turned into a kind of a social tolerance of not knowing what we are. Here, try this out. So autophobia is really interesting to me. It's fear of self-knowledge. And it would play like this. I don't really want to know what the actual fuck I am because what I am is load-bearing. I need my motivations. I need to believe that I'm doing this or that just to wake up and be productive during a day. I need to assume that I'm a certain thing. So yeah, for my work, I'm a pastor, let's say. I have to wake up every morning motivated by the assumption that I was created by God in this sacred text, etc., etc., etc. And then there's a businessman who says, well, I have to wake up with this certain kind of identity. I mean, my identity matters to me. It's one of the ways that I focus, one of the main ways that I focus my attention, and I know what I'm good for, is to have assumptions about what I am. So you come along now and tell me that you have different assumptions about what you are. Well, I'll humor you. Like, you're entitled to your opinion of what you are. I'm entitled to my opinion. You steer clear of attacking mine. I'll steer clear of attacking yours, and we'll get along. So that's what I mean by autophobic agnosticism, is that we wouldn't want to know what we actually are, and it's more civilized to let it, just to humor everyone and be humored in turn. So what I'm suggesting is this alternative route, and I'm about to get into it. It's unfamiliar. In a way, it's inconvenient. Can you imagine what it'd be like to discover what you actually are? Would that be a relief? Would the truth about what you actually are be a relief? Maybe in some ways. I certainly find it a relief, but I also find it terribly disappointing. And I think most people would find it terribly disappointing to discover what I am. And so I don't want to sell it like it's going to set you free to have a sense of what you are, or even to roll up your sleeves and get into the question of what the actual fuck you are. It's something you should enter gingerly, and something that you'd maybe want to keep unfamiliar. And yet there's a part of me that, the larger part of me, and maybe a part of you, is drawn to the question for this reason. I'm here. I'm one of the few things in the universe that can speculate about the whole ball of wax and me in it. I've got this short sliver of life, and I've got some discretionary time and attention, and figuring out what the actual fuck I am is a worthy use of that time. Now, one of the challenges I face in this work is, you could say, it's just the no really aspect of it. Everybody says no really. When you think about it, what everybody would like is for science to prove their intuitions correct. That's what people would want. They'd want their liked story to prove likely. So everybody and their brother and sisters out there saying, I had a revelation, or I have an insight, or this bit of science supports this theory of what the actual fuck we really are. And if you look at those theories, I'm going to argue that they're mostly, if not all, either dualistic, like I have found the magic unexplained explanation that explains me in this other realm. That is, I haven't actually explained it. Or the kind of thing that people say when you really get into the science of what we are, we're quantum energy, or we're nothing. We don't actually have motivations. After all, quantum energy doesn't have motivations. It's a physical, inanimate dynamic. But here we are, we have these motivations and appetites. And so when I say no, really, you should give my approach a listen, I totally understand it if you think I'm just another one of these guys who's saying, no, my beliefs are scientifically proven. I wouldn't fault you for it. Chances are good that's what I am. If you just work out how many other people make those claims and how many of them are doing that. They're claiming they've had the big revelation, and no, not everybody could buy it, but they certainly buy it because it's fun to share it. If you came to that conclusion about what I'm doing, that'd be fine. I'd understand. I don't think I'm doing it. I think I'm doing something different. I think I am trying to explain what the actual fuck I am, derived within nothing but simple physical chemistry, and with no added parts from some other realm, and no elimination or excusing away the parts of me by saying something like selves are a fiction, or you're just a figment of your own imagination, which when you think about it, that kind of thing. Choose determinism, convince yourself you're not a self, you're just a figment. Do you hear how bogus that is? I mean, chemistry doesn't have figments of its imagination. And you can't convince chemistry that it's not a self. You can only convince a self that it's not a self. Having said all that, and how language has confused us over the years about all of this, which was one of the points about the axial age, is that once you get language, you can imagine the ideal, you can imagine the infinite, the infinitely unbiased source of information, and that would be where you get God or the ideal, the Platonic ideal, and all of that. In the meantime, here we are, and here's what we don't notice about the challenge of explaining ourselves and how to deal with that challenge. So there was a time long ago when I was incredibly unlikely to exist. Decimal dust probability that a thing like me would exist, let alone stick around. As I'm in a universe where anything as orderly and squishy as I am would dissolve really quickly. And yet here I am, this very unlikely possibility. But I have always been a possibility, and here's what I mean by that. There's nothing that I do that violates physical law. There's no magic, there's no miracles in me. There's magic in one sense and not in the other. There's magic in me in that it's really surprising that I exist. But it's magic like a magic trick in that I think that there's got to be an explanation for why I exist. And once again, I won't go to the dualistic, hand-waving explanations for why I exist, like something I call a soul or motivation or agency drops into my body from some other realm and makes matter come alive. No, I'm not doing that. So what's left to me? What is my alternative? If I'm not going to deny that I have motivation, and I'm not going to pretend that I've explained motivation by citing some dualistic, unexplained explanation, like, God's will poured into my body or something, what's left of me to do? Well, let's talk about likelinesses and unlikelinesses. I don't think we give them enough attention. In a way, what I have to explain here is how change changes. There's always been change. The universe has always been changing, but there are changes in how change tends to happen. And that would be changes in probabilities. It's just by definition, if you look around. So I'm going to do a little bit of a sidebar here to explain this thing about why there even be change. You probably know this question that philosophers ask as the absolute stumper, which is, why is there something instead of nothing? And another way to ask that, if we want to do it in terms of time and space, is why is there something and some when instead of nothing and no when? Okay. And I want to complement that pair of questions with its opposite. Why is there something instead of everything and every when? What would everywhere and every when look like? It would be a block universe where there is no change. It's all static. And you've probably heard of the block universe concept, that there are 4 dimensions, that there's 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. And they call it the block universe, and there's a problem with it. We ascribe that concept to Einstein as the conclusion that comes out of his work. But then the way they talk about it is that things move around within the block universe. Well, as soon as you got moving around, you got change again, and as soon as you got change, you got time. If you ask those 2 questions, why is there something, there's some particular things instead of nothing and nowhere and no when, and why is there Why are there particular things instead of everything and every when? You end up recognizing that there is change. There has always been change. And there will never stop being change. And the way we talk about this in mathematical terms would be that there's incompleteness, that things keep on changing. Because if there was completeness, then you'd end up with a block. And like I just said, if you start with Einstein's block universe, then any change within the block universe means that it's not a block, that there's still an incompleteness about it. Okay, I'm going to start with that, but that may be a little more cosmological or cosmic or mind-boggling than I needed to go. Let me just go to this as a simpler model of what I think is about likelinesses and unlikeliness. And I'm going to use an intuitive example, but it's already got meaning and information in it, so, just think of it as a thought experiment. So imagine you got a deck of cards and you're going to pull a card from the deck. And there's a chance it'll be a black card or a red card. There's equal probability that it'll be a black or a red card. Now imagine that you take out one of the black cards. The chances of it picking a red card go up a little bit. And if you kept on going, you would reduce the variety of black and red cards. And the fewer black cards there are in there, the more likely it is that a red card is what you'd pick. It's a simple concept. Less variety makes for more similarity. We don't pay nearly enough attention to the relationship between unlikeliness and likeliness. That is, the more unlikely you make some things, like picking a black card, the more likely you make other things, like picking a red card. We could talk about the making of things relatively unlikely as constraint. That's the technical term for it. The more you constrain a system, the more likely things are going to be within the bounds of whatever is constraining the system. So that's easy enough to see. If you've got a molecule that's floating anywhere within this room that you're in, and then you somehow put that molecule into a smaller volume, it's more likely to be in that volume than it is to be anywhere in the room. It's very straightforward. There's a proportional relationship between what's likely and what's unlikely. So you remember a minute ago I'm talking about how unlikely I was in the universe? Let's say at its origins. I was possible, but just highly, highly unlikely. And gets this question of, okay, well, how did I become so damn likely that not only am I here at this moment, but will be here tomorrow and the day after. So I'm talking not just about a likeliness in an instant, but a likeliness of regenerating myself such that I am likely to stick around tomorrow. And as I mentioned in the last episode of this long-winded podcast, if I were to appear suddenly in outer space, or if I were to die here on this planet, my organization would fall apart really quickly. It would not last. I'm self-regenerating this organization that I am. And that makes me different from inanimate things, most of which persist by sheer durability. The furniture in my office is doing nothing to maintain its order. It's just really durable. Well, I'm not durable at all. I am regenerating myself. So how am I doing that? And how did that happen within nothing but this natural universe, this physical universe? It happens through what I'll call unlikelying. I am an unlikelification. Now, I'm going to make a distinction between unlikelying, which can happen in physics, and I'll explain how, and unlikelifying. Unlikelifying, the ifying thing, like rationalizing or justifying, all of those things, the izing, that suffix tends to mean contrived, moralizing. Unlikelifying is me actively engaged in making unlikely my own death. And I have to explain. That's not good enough. It's not good enough for me to simply declare that I'm an agent that regenerates myself. That was good enough at Darwin's era. He assumed selves struggling for their own existence. I have to explain selves struggling for their own existence. And Darwin would admit, he'd be the first to admit that he hadn't explained struggle for existence. He explained speciation based on that assumption. So I have to explain how I'm struggling for my own existence, how I am unlikelifying my own death. That's what I have. That's the burden I am putting on myself in this work. And it's also the payload of this work is that if I can figure out how I'm unlikelifying myself, unlikelifying my own death, I have an understanding of what the actual fuck I am. So, constraints that unlikely some possibilities. There are solid or static constraints. For example, I've got walls on this office I'm in, and they unlikely, you could say, my passing in certain directions. I'm not going to walk through those walls. So that's a static constraint, and those are easy to see. And, you could say that in the case of the wall, it's a path of extreme resistance. I've got a big nose, and if I tried to walk through that wall, it would get bruised. So that's one kind of constraint, but it's not the only kind. There are fluid constraints. So I'm going to end this long-winded episode with an example of a fluid constraint, and it's not going to explain what I am, but it's really important if you want to understand what you are to start really basic. And again, I'm not going to get to make any leaps. And so I just have to give you a few thought experiments to help you see where we're going with this all. And this one should be plenty familiar to you. So you're driving somewhere and GPS tells you that there's congestion up ahead. You got those red lines. Maybe even some sad news about how long it'll take you to get a quarter of a mile because of some congestion. You're on the road, and the reason you're on that road is because it's the path of least resistance to where you wanted to go. But now there's congestion there, and it may no longer be the path of least resistance. In fact, the unlikeliness of getting swiftly through that traffic makes other paths more likely as a path of least resistance. Okay, so what is traffic congestion? Some people associate physicalism or naturalism with materialism, but that's not true. Materialism suggests few materials would make this assumption, but the idea is that if you want to know what's real in this universe, it's material, it's solid things. If they're not solid, they're not real. But obviously that's not true. There's lots of space between things. And the distance between things, the relative configuration of matter, what we might call its organization, its pattern, its form, all of that is perfectly natural. It's perfectly physical. It's just not material. So coming back to the traffic congestion, what is it? It's a tighter packing of stuff flowing through someplace. It's a congestion. It's a little thick. Not very viscous, or very viscous. It's not easy to get through it. But what is it? It's not a solid thing. Traffic, we can give it a name. That's the problem with language, is we give anything a name and make it sound like a solid, durable object. Traffic congestion isn't that. It's not even made of stuff. It's made through stuff. The car's passing through it. Damn slowly at that. Because there's some kind of congestion up ahead. So notice, we're trying to understand, what I'm trying to do in this work is explain how change changes. And to do that, I have to understand how likely things become less likely, and unlikely things therefore become more likely. Just like as I remove black cards from that deck of cards, picking a black card less likely than it was makes picking a red card more likely than it was. So we're going to be paying attention to that stuff. We're going to be paying attention to what I'll call emergent constraints. And the constraints will tend to be fluid. Now, traffic congestion, we're already talking about people who are trying to get somewhere. which means that we're all way up at the level of selves. But I said that just to be intuitive about it. The same thing is true of any fluid dynamics would have this same quality. There's congestion, there's turbulence, there's all of that. So if I want to understand what I am, I'm going to start with the fact that there is change and that you also get this kind of population effect where a bunch of material stuff can be packed closer together or even bonded to each other, fused like crystals, and that paths can change because of constraints, fluid constraints. Now, I will jump ahead just brief enough to make this comment. What do I think I am? I think that I am a fluid constraint. I'm a peculiar kind of traffic congestion. First of all, it's really complicated. I know that half of the congestions I am inside of myself that are causing things to flow in some directions more likely than in other directions. But overall, there is a constraint that I am, which is the difference between alive and dead. And in our work, we call it the hologenic constraint. It's the constraint that generates the whole of me staying alive. I also think of it as a loophole, spelled with a W in a parenthesis. That is, the whole I am is made of all of the preventions, all the things I prevent my chemistry, my current congestions from doing. How would I define this constraint? Well, I'm a constraint, a fluid constraint that channels energy and matter, kind of like a traffic congestion, effort to prevent the degeneration of the constraint I am. Now that's loopy. Like I said, it was a loophole, in both senses. So there are holes, things that I'm unlikely to do. You think of those as a kind of a dynamic hole. The don't go there's that my body is busy maintaining. And because of those don't go, things go other ways. Where do they go? They go into the regeneration of the constraint I am. So I'm a limitation on what chemistry would otherwise do. I'm not something actually added to chemistry. I'm a reduction in possibilities that were available to inanimate chemistry. I limit what chemistry could do. And when I die, that chemistry will be freed up to do a whole lot more different things than I allow it to do as long as it's in my body. That may sound mystical. It's not. It's really down to earth. And I'm going to give you an example of how it's down to earth so you can play with it. You have shelter, you have clothes on, you have food. You do all this work to maintain those things. Why? Because you live in a degenerative universe where things fall apart. So if, for example, if you didn't have a roof over your head, the things in your house would get eroded much faster. And if you didn't have clothes on your body would be eroded much faster. And if you didn't have food, energy and food coming into your body, you would also degenerate really quickly. So you're doing all this degeneration prevention work. And what do I mean by work? It's actually effort. It's narrower than work. There's all sorts of physical work that amounts to nothing. They say no pain, no gain. Fair enough, but it doesn't mean that all pain leads to gain. So all work doesn't lead to productivity. You limit yourself to work that is likely to be productive and enabling you to continue to work tomorrow. You are not the breakfast you ate this morning. You are how you channel that into the prevention of your own death so that you can eat breakfast tomorrow and do the same thing over again. But above all, you prevent yourself from dithering. That's what you do. Of all the things you could do, you do the things that prevent your own ending. You do the things that enable you to not dither tomorrow. So I have a whole explanation. I have not explained it yet. I've not derived that yet from physical chemistry. And I can, and it's not harder than a fifth grader could understand. It's really quite intuitive if you got a stomach for it. Stomaching us is a big challenge. But I have an explanation. It'll come out in future videos. But in the meantime, where have we gone? We've said we're going to drop the dualistic, unexplained explanations, and yet we're not going to drop what we have to explain from them. We're going to drop that reductionistic, convince yourself you're not a self, you're just a figment bullshit. We have to explain what we are, but within nothing but nature. And nature is not just matter, it's relationships between things, change in things. We're trying to explain how change changes, and we're going to do that by paying attention to relative likeliness and unlikeliness. That's what we're going to do here, and we're going to get all the way up to your sweet soul and all the complications and that whole cluster flux of emotions and ideas and annoying, trying people that you have to deal with in your life. We're going to get to all of that because I'm going to allow myself to be long-winded, and if you're here or not, is not going to be a sales pitch. It's going to be less hustle than even my charmless videos in which I try to add a production value here or there. There are so many better, more entertaining things to do if you want entertainment, and I'm a channel surfer, and there's only so much of this kind of talk I can take. But if you want it, that's what this is for. This is an opportunity to step back from all that stuff, maybe put this on while you're, I don't know, doing something. I do it best when I'm walking because that enables my fidgety body to exercise while my mind engages with this stuff. It's not really like I'm walking. My body's walking and I'm thinking. However you use this, if you use it at all, that's what this is for. It's for people who want to use a few moments of their life here, stepping out of the autophobic agnosticism, tolerance of everybody's narrative, including our own narrative, and get into the perhaps in some ways more delightful, but in many ways scarier narrative about what we are, what the actual fuck we are. No smoke and mirrors, no wild cards from another realm, no supernatural wild card trump cards, and yet really explaining what we are, not eliminating, like saying, since there's no spirit from a secondary realm, there's no spirit, which is what the eliminativist, materialist, reductionists will say. We're not doing that. We're doing neither of those. I call my book Neither Ghost Nor Machine, The Emergence and Nature of Selves. It's a good title. So you can see that neither ghost, that is, I'm not going to use any supernatural things, nor am I going to say that I'm nothing but mere mechanism. One of the things you'll get out of this is an explanation for how we are like and different from machines. Machines, for example, don't regenerate themselves. We do. Okay. All right. So I'll be back whether you like it or not.